and welcome to another episode of the Event Tech Talk Show. We've had a little hiatus and a little break. It's been busy at the Event Industry News Event Tech Live Towers. We're not far off now, Event Tech Live London 2022. It doesn't seem like 2 minutes ago since we produced Event Tech Live London 21 in the middle of a pandemic. So I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the show. But joining me all the way from the States is Jo Colangelo. I've absolutely butchered that, Joe. I've absolutely butchered. We literally spent about 5 minutes just before I started recording. Saying, how do I say your surname? I'm so precious with surnames because I know it really means a lot to people. So I do apologize about that. But Jo is from Bear Analytics, a great company doing some really interesting things, both with organizers and event technology companies in the trade show space as well. So I wanted Jo to come on and talk to me a little bit around data analytics, what people are actually doing with them, what's interesting. But Jo, welcome to today's podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm super excited for today's discussion, and have been a big fan for a long time. So it's fun to be in the seat here.
I'm at least I've got one, Jo. At least I've got one. Jo, I always want people to tell a little bit about their backstory, how they got started in the industry, what attracted them to the event sector. I know you've got an interesting story because some things changed with Bear Analytics kind of over the pandemic period. So, how did you get started within events and event tech?
Yeah, so how we got started in events was a giant accident, actually. I started working for a biotech trade organization in 2008, and my background was in the pharmaceutical science area. And they also happened to put on events. And so as I got dragged into that arena, my co-founder, Eric, and I, we started working on their events teams. And then for kind of the 5 or 6 years that we were there, realized that there was, a pretty big deficiency on the data side. And that was coming from a team that actually had a number of data analysts, including myself, and we couldn't do enough. And so we were like, you know what, I bet this problem kind of exists everywhere. And we founded Bear kind of with that ethos in mind in the summer of 2013. And we started off as just, a couple of spreadsheet warriors doing things, pretty manually, but just focusing solely on data and events. And then slowly we grew the event tech stack. And then, like a lot of us in the industry, we got pretty wiped out because we had become one of the preeminent kind of large event analytics companies. And when the pandemic hit, it just wasn't cool to have large events for a period of time. And so we took that time, to kind of revisit. We actually had an exercise where we revisited why did we start the company? Because we were ready to shut it down. We gave it the good old college try. What are you going to do? And ultimately what came out of that discussion and those discussions with some of our advisors was like, we think events are huge. They're just taking a little bit of a different shape. This is going to change everything kind of going forward, and data is still going to be important. And so we spent the majority of 2021 building what's now Bear IQ.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad you're around still, and I'm glad you stuck it out, because I think, you went a different direction to what many did at the time, which is obviously supporting with predominantly just virtual platforms, being able to deliver events online. I'm right with you. I believe data has always been and will become even more important when it comes to delivering events. It's kind of the lifeblood of what we rely on. My own personal opinions, I hope maybe you change my mind a little bit, is a lot of the industry kind of undervalue data. But maybe that's because they don't actually understand what they actually want out of the data, or there's too much of it accessible to them, so they struggle to kind of really make sense of it, really. Or it's, lots of different buckets of data, and they're trying to kind of make that kind of come together. But before we get into that, just a quick question back to the previous company, which obviously sparked and formed the idea to set up Bear Analytics. Like, what was that company specifically trying to find out with the data that they had access to?
Yeah, I mean, the questions haven't changed in the last kind of 10 or 15 years, right? It's who's our audience, who are our best revenue centers, what are these organizations, what are the behaviors and trends, and the reason I kind of pointed my finger when you mentioned that the data being all over the place is because I still firmly believe that's the number one challenge right now in the marketplace on why people feel as if they're hamstrung or can't do more with their data. It's because it's disparate. And that was absolutely the number one challenge that we had. And so you had all of these kind of non-integrated systems, collecting hyper valuable information, but then putting the context and the measurement as to what you can do with that information, it was just absent. It was definitely like, kind of an insight desert 10 or 15 years ago when we first started. And that was what we set out to kind of rectify.
And so how have you kind of brought all that together so it's understandable or usable when it comes to bear analytics then?
Yeah, so it turns out there's a couple of key things that you kind of got to do right. So the first thing is you got to bring all the data together. And most of the time, people just jump to, okay, let's go to integrations, which is kind of commonplace right now. But again, 10 years ago, there wasn't a huge appetite for that because it was usually custom tech work and had a big price tag associated with it. But even after you get all that data centralized, or at least kind of talking to each other, you then got to go through the process, which is a little bit arduous as well, is the cleaning and consolidating. So it can be anything from, I got duplicate records, I got duplicate company records. Sometimes I put Bear Analytics, my co-founder might register and put Bear Analytics Inc. Right? We want to rectify those things. This is all human generated information for the most part. And then for some of that transactional data, different demographics, they're changing over time. And so you need to be able to have a mechanism in place so that when you're looking at a chart, it doesn't say CEO and Chief Executive Officer next to itself. That doesn't make any sense. People lose faith when you get that done. Then you do all the math, you get the calculations, you show it on a pretty chart. But even then, that's not the end of the story. You got to make it enabling. You can make the most beautiful dashboards in the world. If people can't do something with it or know what to do with it or put it in, what we call put the ball in play, we failed. Full stop. That's it.
Very interesting. So I guess so to me then, the first challenge you're overcoming for most organizers is bringing all that, really cleaning it up, that data, so that it gets to a point where it's usable. At the point that it's usable, then at the moment with the customers that you're working with, kind of which business operations are really getting value of that? Is that like marketing? Is it sales, operations? Is it a collaboration of all of them? Because I'm thinking about our processes here at Event Tech Live, Event Industry News, and lots of different departments ask for intel, shall we say, or months, weeks past the event. They kind of want to look retrospectively and say, hey, like, I don't know, how many venues did people book that we ask the question on? Or like, I've got a company who wants to just look for the CEOs of the top five Fortune 500 companies. How many of those came to the event last time? Is that the type of thing that you're enabling those teams to be able to access?
Everything you just said, and I would just add one more thing in terms of the groups, is if you have a specific group related to like content, certifications, anything around a program or programming development. Obviously, with the emergence of some of these virtual tools that are now we're starting to see bleed into the on-demand or on-site experience, the tracking is just way up. The data volume is just way up, which means the cool things that you can do with it in terms of going, folks like yourselves have found value in these types of sessions going forward. It's that's the only other thing I would add, but you're absolutely right. Sales, marketing, and ops.
So from a buyer perspective, then this is a tool that really exists within their ecosystem 365 days, right? That it's not just an event by event led kind of model. It's a platform that I guess like their Salesforce or their CRM system, they're kind of able to tap into this information consistently right throughout the year, right? And I guess I'm going to assume track year against year and previous historical events and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And so going back to that, the ability to clean and consolidate data across multiple sources. We've also generally, by and large, have seen event organizers have been choosing different platforms. Obviously, some of that has been influenced by, has the event taken place live or has it been virtual and things like that. But just because, let's take registration, because you kind of have to have registration in some way, shape, or form across all events. Even if you used a reg platform 3 years ago, you likely don't have an existing relationship. You're on your new platform. You love your new platform, but that data, where does that data live? Yeah. Well, if it's only in a spreadsheet or it's in a legacy API, we have the ability to, pull that down and get that to speak the same language. And that just pulls a lot of the load off of the event organizer. But to your other point there, about, what are we kind of seeing in the marketplace now from like a utility standpoint. It's really about, on the marketing side, who is our audience? On the sales side, how do we retain and start to think about growing exhibitors? And then how to diversify sponsorships. That's a big mandate that we're hearing in the marketplace, and we think data can help inform. It's not going to solve everybody's problem, right? But the whole goal is it helps to inform how to make your event bigger, stronger, faster.
Yeah, there's so much that's kind of popping out to me, and I'm going to try and remember it all and ask you about it all. So I think the first thing I want to take from that and kind of delve into deeper, and I've had this experience myself, that, you know, one of the beautiful things about Event Tech Live is we have many companies that want to work with us, and we do, and we try and make it fair, and we switch and we move, and that gives a different experience to our attendees. It creates a big headache internally from change management and understanding new platforms and new technologies. But one of the things that caught us out recently, or maybe a year ago or so, was that we'd moved from one platform to another, and rightly so. That license and that agreement had ended, and all those analytics sat inside that platform, locked away forever and a day. Now, luckily for us, we got a good relationship with that supplier, and we had a conversation with them, and they granted us back access, and we got back in there. And in that moment, we got the information that we need, so it was problem solved. However, you know, my situation is probably slightly different to most of the event organizers out there, that if they've finalized a deal and a contract with somebody and they've moved on, that's it. It's done, right? They're never getting it back out. So hopefully they've got it on a spreadsheet somewhere. But in that situation, a platform like yours, it exists for while ever the platform exists as well, right? So while ever they've got a contract with you, it doesn't matter then what suppliers they move around with.
Yeah, and that's the reason we don't have like a preferred supplier list or anything like that. You know, we kind of view ourselves as Switzerland. We're the analytics layer that sits on your event tech stack. Because at the end of the day, you should be putting out the stack that your audience or your clients and customers want to experience. The data shouldn't be limiting in that regard. And I'm sorry, I just cut you off. I didn't mean to do that.
No, not at all. This is a free-flowing podcast. You're more than welcome to talk over me, and I probably will do it at some point to yourself, so I apologize in advance. But so the next question that kind of springs to my mind is then, why would any event technology company potentially spend resource and time and investment in creating an analytics dashboard for their platform when organizers might be using yours? Is there not that potential to kind of like free up that resource and plug your technology in with theirs and have that kind of, so it's essentially, I use Bear Analytics externally, and when I'm in this dashboard with your platform, I can essentially use Bear Analytics to display the data and information about this particular event or that kind of stuff. Are those the kind of conversations that are happening, or is that kind of one of the challenges that you see as well?
Yeah, no. So that's a great point. And I'm not going to, pretend to know all of the inner workings of the strategies of these event tech companies, but having talked to a good number of them, into the hundreds at this point, to give you a sense of scale, having a value and understanding of data in today's environment is table stakes. So I don't know if you can say, hey, we're a cutting edge event platform, but we outsource our data piece.
Okay.
So I respect, and because when we talk to a lot of these platforms, we're like, well, we already have analytics. What's the value of yours? And we're like, well, we're not trying to compete with, just single platform. You want to look very specifically at what you want to offer your clients. We tell a more comprehensive picture across platforms, across years, and across events, which means now this intimately as an event organizer, not all your events are tailored to the same audience and are the same size.
True.
So if you're using a different stack within a given year and you want to know, you got your flagship event and 4 regional events, you got 5 events a year, but you want to know how many times Joe has come to those events or Bear Analytics, and you're using 2 or 3 event tech companies, like we're kind of one of the only names in the game to get that done. So we don't dissuade event tech platforms and say, just use us, don't do your own thing, because ultimately I think it ends up hurting their business. We're just kind of taking it that next level.
Yeah, I guess they've got to service those customers that maybe not Bear Analytics customers at that point. But maybe that also opens a conversation by using Bear Analytics and the framework and utilizing your system, just the way that people use Tableau and other technologies within other systems, or maybe Arena for chat within event platforms and things like that. They can free up that resource, provide a better experience, and consistently get support and a consistently upgraded solution on that side of things and provide a better system. Anyway, maybe that's a conversation I can broach with some of those technology companies, and we can get them being powered by their analytics, because I have seen your solution and I was extremely impressed with what you guys have built. And I think there's so many benefits to it. But the experience of those data analytics are vastly different when it comes to the actual event technology platforms. Some are fantastic, some are woefully underbuilt or supported. So there's a massive difference in experience there. And I can see lots of people wanting a consistent experience, something that's really built for purpose and focused as well, which obviously that's what you guys are doing.
I mean, it's the only thing we do. That's the other thing. We don't have to worry about the dozens and dozens of other modules that these event tech platforms have to do. So, we stay in our lane. We know what we're good at. And we kind of knock it out of the ballpark. And I empathize to, groups that have much more complex tech stacks than we do.
Yeah. Well, maybe after this, you'll be flooded with event tech platforms reaching out and saying, let's have a conversation. One of the other things that kind of springs to mind that you're doing, which we talk about in the events industry often, is those headline numbers. Everybody sells their shows or events by those headline numbers. 10,000 attendees, 400 countries. Not that there's 400 countries, but like 100 countries. These well-known brands that you recognize that everybody has at their events because they're huge companies and they're probably integrated into every sector, so they have attendees going to them. But we also have that conversation about personalization, right? We have that conversation around personalization of somebody that comes to Event Tech Live can maybe engage with maybe a dozen or so people really on a decent level over the course of a day. So maybe 24 or more people over the course of 2 days. So they're not looking for 10,000. They're not even looking for 2,000. They're looking for 20 or 24. And I often feel that's where analytics and data from that sales and marketing process can really come into its play, because I'm guessing with your platform, you can really kind of nail down and drill down into that and can go, okay, here's the top 10 people that we have that we think you might want to put your brand in front of, or you might want to meet at the show. Are those the types of conversations, or is that the way that some of those organizers are using your technology then?
Yeah, I think the use case that you just gave there is a particularly interesting one, because starting at the beginning of 2022, we've really started seeing for the first time marketing and sales, especially for like larger conferences and trade shows, working more closely together. So the marketing folks that are in charge of the acquisition piece, who is trying, effectively, to build bring the audience side of things, you're not wrong, have largely said, 10,000. And of course, the implication there is I'm going to find what I want in that seat, right? And then the exhibitors who are going, well, I'm trying to figure out if I should keep this level, if I should renew, if I should even, potentially maybe churn out and abandon. Why should I come? And leading in, now we started to see the marketing folks going, oh, we're not just going to share, we're on pace to hit 10,000. We're going to share, we got 400 people that are currently signed up with this, particular demographic type, whether it's industry type, various titles. Sometimes you're doing a cross tab of those. So yeah, I mean, we, that's one of the first needs that frankly we have to satisfy, is things around audience, composition, especially leading into the event, because I think now you can't just rely on because it was great last year, because it wasn't. That's why. And so I'd like to believe that, yeah, we make some of those really basic but fundamental questions a lot easier. Folks just can export these, print screen, and share it, and that's what they do.
Yeah, I think everybody in the industry at the moment understands that because of what happened over the pandemic, and because it was such an extended and long period of time, it totally changed habits, right? It changed where people lived, what they were focused on, the sectors that they were working in, the industries. Remote working has in some ways created many benefits to the events industry in people more accessing virtual events because they're not in an office environment as much. So there's not that kind of like looking over your shoulder, kind of what are you doing kind of thing. They can actually access virtual events and kind of listen to them or watch them as they're carrying on the working. But that also then presents the challenge of actually getting people out of their comfort zone from their home and traveling into, major cities and things like that, which they may not live in now. So I think everybody recognizes that as an industry, and specifically event marketers and therefore sales teams as well, we're going to have to work harder to get those people to come. And the way that, in my opinion, the way to get them to come is to show them that the value that they specifically want is in the room. That might be content for some people, but that often is at large trade shows and exhibitions and other events, is meeting those half a dozen people that will maybe put them on a different path when it comes to their business or their own career path, or it might be the bare analytics that they're looking for. They just can't find anywhere else. And you're in the room and they want to have a conversation with you. And that's the value of traveling to that event. So without tools like yours to be able to really showcase that or understand that, I think we're going to be relying on kind of that old, just invite as many people as possible and kind of work on a 50% attrition. And then hopefully we'll kind of get somewhere close to what we want. And serendipity might come into play, and those people meet on the show floor or in one of the sessions or something, or one of the networking events or something like that. But I think data can help us as an industry facilitate that and help that along the way. But many don't have access to that kind of tools or the understanding, I don't think, at the moment. I'm hopeful that it's an area that we invest in more as an industry, because I also think it'll make us a lot more profitable and buoyant and resistant to changes, outside factors, should I say. I think everybody wants to know who's in the room, and everybody wants to kind of have that presented to them and like, hey, Adam, you should meet with Joe, or Joe, you should meet with David, and like. Do you see any trends kind of forming when you look at the events that you're working with, in terms of like that's happened since the pandemic? Have you noticed any changes in trends that are coming out of that data?
Yeah. So, I mean, so I'm just going to touch on one of the previous points that you just mentioned around let's get folks into the room. Well, the thing that has to happen before, and I'm going to oversimplify this, but before you get folks into the rooms, you gotta reach them.
Yeah.
You got to hit them over email and, omni-channel, sure. But in a given year, pre-pandemic, we were seeing anywhere from about 5 to 10% of the average list for our client churning out.
Wow.
So just seeing that compounded over 2 years, all things being equal, let alone, what they call great resignation here in the States, folks hopping companies. So the point is, even if you wanted to email every single person, every single message, that list can be anywhere from, in a good day, 20% to 35% smaller than it was 2 years ago. And so it's not just about the individual. We also want to make sure our customers and clients are tracking organizational behaviors. Because if we see, for example, and a lot of this is in like the mid-tier or smaller companies, you used to have 2 or 3 attendees. They all churned out, or the company got, kind of hit on hard times. We want to surface, you're not seeing Acme Corporation 1, 2, 3. They got a goose egg right now. So if you're going to be hyper targeted about, retargeting, list acquisition, what have you, we're at least pointing you in the right direction. To go after where you may not have as strong of relationships as you've had in the past, and kind of gap fill. Getting to your second, more direct, that's kind of one trend on like the overall arching data side.
Could I just
go right ahead
a little bit then, Joe? So does your platform visually kind of identify and notify, almost grade companies that are on that database? So an event marketer or an organizer can see kind of a glance of like, oh, hey, there's a red flag over here. We need to do something about that.
Yeah, in real time. And we do it in 2 ways. So, for example, you might say Bear Analytics has historically sent 5 people. Right now, we only have 1 in the queue. So you're going to see that we have at least 1 person, great, but we're underperforming, right? And ideally, you want to make sure that you're moving the ball down the field to get back toward 5, or, grow it. And then secondly, we separate out everybody who's throwing up a goose egg right now in a whole nother bucket, and we rank them by what they've done in the past. So if, we want to flag folks that sent 20, 30, 40 people historically and are now have none. And it could be, the company doesn't exist. There's been mergers and acquisitions. So you're going to have some of those gaps. But the idea is, let's not look through a sea of 10,000 companies. Let's point you directly to the 100 that are going to make the biggest impact. And then let's do something about it. Again, going back to that kind of actionability ethos.
Yeah, it's that allocation of resources, right? It's like, we can't focus on maybe all 10,000 people, but what's our top 20% that we really want in the room, we really need in the room? Or if 5% of that has left the industry, so to speak, or moved on, where's the next 5% that's going to fill that gap and kind of make our event as valuable as it was for everybody as it was before. And that's that. Yeah, without that data, without that analytics, that's so challenging, right?
And you have to assume it's almost like an e-commerce sale. So if we're trying now to sell new people in an organization where we don't have that individual relationship, but we have that B2B relationship, but perhaps that legacy connection isn't known by our future attendees, you have to build that relationship. The cost of customer acquisition goes up. And it's not just the actual cost of, how much is it to send them a brochure or send them the email. There's a time cost in that. And that is often the biggest or the most expensive cost, if you will, because attention spans are lower. Windows, and this was going to be my point on, current trends across the board, regardless of industry, regardless of event size, we're seeing people make the decision to participate at an event later and later. So that, maybe the one takeaway for the viewers or the listeners today is if they're performing on par with 2019 for their 22 event, and their week over week calc is pretty close, that's a very good sign.
Yeah.
But if you're far behind and you're early in your cycle, don't worry about it. You still have time to catch up. And unfortunately, it's not a great, I empathize with the marketers. It's not a fun position to be in. That's just the reality of the market where we're at right now.
But in that scenario right there, like I can easily see a scenario where, those that don't have access to that information maybe make rash decisions or rash judgments based on previous. They're not necessarily tracking it in line for line. They're going on a gut feeling. And maybe they make some bad decisions or put pressure on unduly to those in those roles to kind of go, we're behind. So we're just behind. We need to do something about it, right? But then where do they focus their efforts on? And it's those kinds of things that I think can be really costly to a business because they create unease and scarcity and things like that. And then you're not necessarily focusing on the goal of delivering the event or making the event a great experience. You then rediverting resource to kind of go, let's just get more people registered rather than the right people registering or actually, no, it's fine. We're kind of tracking with industry standard, or it's, we know that it's going to be slightly late at this time. And here's the statistics for it.
Yeah, I mean, often there's a lot that's lost in the top line number, right? So in Q2, and this isn't really emblematic of where we currently stand, but in Q2, we had a couple of customers that were tracking 50% behind pace, and we were looking at other events in the platform, and we were letting them know with our forecasting algorithm, like, hey, it's actually it's not going to end up this way. You're not going to crush numbers, but it's going to get better. But it's also, where should we focus? So again, it's not just let's do anything. To your point, let's not do everything to everyone, but there's going to be specific cohorts that are underperforming. We're going to try a couple things. If they continue to underperform, we pivot those resources away. And so the more that you have to do is be comfortable being more agile, which is really leaning into being uncomfortable, going, I don't know the messaging we're going to go out to next week. I don't know the cohort. We're going to wait to see the data and then we're going to act. But putting your people and the processes in place to go, once we have that, we're going to put it in play, look at it a week, look at it 2 weeks, and then pivot if we need to. It's really, for some folks, it's the deviation of, well, we just laid out the marketing plan 3 months in advance or 5 months in advance. Like, you gotta be ready to move as the game changes.
Just having more of a thought around that marketing conversation and those marketing teams that are activating on an event and driving those registrations, doing that audience acquisition and that sales and sponsorship support. I totally appreciate that Bear Analytics is not a marketing platform, but are you, or do you think you will ever pull some of those analytics in terms of those goal conversions that allow them to analyze and assess kind of the effectiveness of some of their marketing campaigns, whether that be email or social or click ads like Google and things like that? Or are you pulling that in already?
Yeah, so we're doing a little bit of that already. So just we're not going to be a marketing a marketing platform, just to be honest, in case anybody's waiting on the edge of their seat for that one. But we do think that we have the ability to help surface the right insights to understand things like campaign performance. There's some things we're doing now around personas, where we're using like a mathematical model that builds out transactional based or engagement based personas. So basically think of it from like an audience standpoint, who is the customer who has experienced my experiences the most and is therefore the most likely to come back, and then all the way to the other end of the scale, which would be somebody who was abandoned or is now coming into the ecosystem for the first time as a first timer, and putting them into buckets, describing those buckets, and then allowing you to campaign off of those buckets. Now you might run that through Salesforce, Pardot, HubSpot, whatever, to do that. But then of course, what is the natural question that comes back? Where did I see things in an elegant format where I can get, open rates, click-throughs, and then if I have codes in there, the underlying last point of attribution or conversion. We're pretty good on the last point. So whether you're using personalized URLs or the codes, we can tell you what the profile looks like of who has used. But now folks want to go farther upstream because it's always, it's the marketer's constant battle to figure out, what was the thing that tipped them over the edge, or now we're getting into the sequence of things. So we're going right there with them. We're not 100% there yet, but that's where we're going.
I think that's so hard to track though anyway, isn't it? Especially with events, because the one driving reason for that person to attend one year might be to source a new platform. The next year, it might just be to meet up with Joe from Bear Analytics because he said, hey, I'm going to EventTech Live and do you want to fancy a beer? And that could be the pivotal thing that makes that person click on that email or that text message or whatever it is, or that social post, and decide to register at that point. So that's really, really challenging, I think, anyway. But I guess at least you're giving an indication for those other people that are kind of maybe attending for the same reason or have a pattern, I say, on kind of when and how they register and what drives that registration, right?
It's really the second part. It's that pattern piece, because at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to pinpoint and go, is email 4, it was line 3, and they were smitten with that, right? Because like you said, the way I used to work when I was on the event side, my boss wanted me to go to an event. He came into my office and goes, hey, sign up for this.
Yeah.
Don't spend more than this on a hotel. I don't know how we're capturing that information, right? So it's some of it's always going to be a black box, but if we can look at a large enough amount of information in aggregate, you can start to see some of the patterns or some of the tendencies.
One of the things that springs to mind, and I've always had a vision that we might get this to somewhere in sophisticated marketing, is the ability to trigger communication to attendees based on other people in their close social or industry network that's also registering at that time. And the way that I visualize that is, and fully enough, it happened in a WhatsApp group that I'm in. 2 people from that WhatsApp group had actually registered for an event, so we're going independently of each other, although being there potentially at the same time, possibly even missing each other. But it came into the WhatsApp group to highlight that, and then actually from that, 2 or 3 other members from that WhatsApp group said, oh, well, if you're going, I'll register for that, because it creates a meeting point, it creates a focal point for everybody in that kind of close-knit network group. And the way that I always visualize that we might get to somewhere as an events industry is it goes, an email lands and goes, hey, Adam, Joe, Matt, and Maggie have all registered in the last week for this event. Are you coming? Kind of thing. Do you think that using analytics like yours and marketing platforms and the combination of the two, we might be able to get to a scenario like that on that value add?
Well, I mean, I think there's already a couple of platforms trying to do this now, right? Where you register for an event, and then you post it on LinkedIn and Twitter, and then that. And I mean, without knowing kind of any of the inside baseball, I think that's, those have been pretty successful. From a, this is really about the peer or social validation of I found enough value to attend this event, and then the implication is, well, I know Adam does his homework, and if he's willing to send himself and his team, and it's worth the opportunity cost and the actual cost, like that speaks a little bit. So I absolutely. Absolutely, believe in that. Again, I think that's what we're really ultimately talking about here is discovery, and that's one of the areas that I think the events industry is most efficient in, especially around content. How many times have you gotten an email over 500 sessions, and then it goes to a link, and then you get all of them in alphabetical order, and there's a search bar at the top. Yeah. Discovery is still massively challenging for events, and it's also the place where I think a lot of these folks are like, well, let's personalize events like Netflix. Well, thematically, that's a great idea, and this is coming from a data guy. Like, I would love, right, to be able to get to that point, but the reality is these events aren't libraries that stay up for years and months. I think we're starting to see more of that, but still not even close. And there's a massive amount of there's both a lot of information in a short period of time and not enough information to have the amount of discovery that like a Netflix can have or an Amazon Prime can have on you. So just like the content itself within an event, I think what you're speaking to is the ability to for individuals to discover what events they should actually be attending, because it's going to scratch the itch that they're trying to resolve.
Yeah, I think you're right. I see that problem and that challenge actually even more so around on-demand content, because then it's generally all kind of just dumped into one place by an organizer, and the session title and the session description, even though that's past tense, is often used for the description and title of that session. And I have had this experience at many events that I go to, that you read a session title and you read a session description and you think you're going to get one thing, and it's actually something totally different. The conversation's different. The what's talked about is totally different. And there are a couple of companies out there trying to solve that. You know, Clipper and a few others are trying to make it so you can find that moment in time that is meaningful for you. But that's only still at the point where you as an individual have taken the steps to get to that content to go, I think this is why I know what I want. Now let me try and find in this content that piece that means the most to me. As event marketers and event owners and content owners, we still got to get that person back to that content, right? Which I think is what you're saying, is that we could potentially get that there and get that the right content in front of the right people at the right time at the point of understanding what they actually want.
And well, so let's say let's use that on-demand example. Let's say I have the opposite of the experience that you're talking about. Like, I love this particular piece of content, right? How do I know when the next iteration of something like this, like when does season 2 of this content drop? That's really hard right now.
Yeah.
And it's the easiest it's ever been, but it's still extremely hard.
Yeah.
And the only way that, and you know, I don't have all the answers, but the only way that I think we're kind of getting to this as an industry, and that we've kind of gotten to this in industry in the past, is by who the speakers are. So that's why you start to see with events that have a long legacy, oh, so-and-so speaking again. Well, it's because it's almost like you're Starbucksifying what that piece of content is. And you know, hey, Jerry's up there again. He knows what's going on. Oh, he's talking with Susie. That was an awesome panel last year. I'm going to attend to it. Because outside of it, it's really challenging right now outside of it.
Yeah. Maybe there's a whole nother business there with a website that's just I'm speaking at, and you can just follow speakers and then you know when the next.
Yeah, you flip it on its head. Yeah, exactly.
But this is where I think what's really exciting about the events industry is we offer so much value to every industry and every business and things like that. And we often go quiet on people for maybe 365 days, you know, till the next event. And that's if it's an annualized event. And I think actually the data that we've got can give us so much more ability to drive more value into the hands of those people that are our audience throughout the rest of the year, you know, whether that's, you know, helping another organizer or another speaker direct them to that event in partnership. So it's kind of like a media partnership or an event partnership. Maybe it's driving more digital content without cannibalizing that in-person element, which I know lots of the industry is scared of. Or whether it's actually working with our existing exhibitors, sponsors, and those that are helping to fund and put the event on to say, now we've done this event, we actually now understand this about that audience, and we think we have 3 months to deliver another compelling piece of content in this format to them, and we're pretty confident that they'll turn up because it's exactly what they want. So then from a sponsor's perspective, that's a viable and worthwhile reinvestment if they continually want to try and drive value to that audience. Let's say it's a really high profile doctors or lawyers or something like that like high value targets. Like, what are they going to do? What is that company going to do? Well, if you're not servicing them for another 6 to 12 months, they're probably going to go elsewhere and spend some budget somewhere else, whether that be with a competitor event or a publication or something like that, and go, well, we still want to be in front of that audience. We don't want to wait a year. But I think that's where data can really come in, is understanding really what our audience wants as well post-event, so that we can continually serve value to them. The same way that, you know, the Netflix analogy, the same way that they know the millions of users what kind of programs and content they're watching, so they can, you know, invest more into the production of content that is similar or associated with that, right? So they can continually drive value back to that audience and keep those subscriptions going.
I mean, ultimately, the event owner organizers' ambitions and outcomes are aligned with the sponsors in that both want to extend their product, service, brand 365.
Yep.
And so it only behooves the sponsor to at least listen to what the organizer is thinking about. I don't think we're there as an industry yet, because like you said, we had this brick and mortar, I'll talk to you for 5 days and then not ignore you the other 360, but really the other 360 was about the next 5 days.
Yep.
Right. And so
Yep.
and now we're starting to see with some of these content distribution channels and technologies, that's going to get extended. I wouldn't say it's solved yet, but I'm a firm believer that we're still kind of in, to take a baseball analogy, now maybe we're in the third inning of this. Folks are getting real smart real quick. They're extending the brand and the value life cycle of their event, and they're not just jamming as much experience into those 5 days, and they're showing it tail off. And I think you're going to see, especially the forward-looking brands are going to go, yeah, this is exactly what we want to be aligned with.
Yeah. I think you're right there, Joe. One of the other questions that maybe jumped into my mind about what you're providing companies, and this is a conversation less about event tech, but more about the events industry in general, is that conversation around mergers, acquisitions, and launches. So that could be geo-clones, that could be other additional event opportunities that an organizer wants to explore. They're kind of two slightly different conversations, so we might have to kind of break it down. But one of the things that I know many companies rely on is historical data about an event, right? When they're coming to that point of having a conversation about exit into a company or their interest in a company. And having spoke to many organizers in the past, I've often had the conversation that's popped up a couple of times, which is strategic in choice of technology being part of their long-term merger and acquisition strategy, i.e. Salesforce. For a young startup company, Salesforce can be a very expensive product, but they know, 5 years down the line, when they've hopefully hit their targets and goals, that when they go to market, that's an extremely comfortable thing for the prospective buyer, because they understand that platform, they understand that technology, and they know they can pull the reports and data out of it that they're going to want to be able to analyze that acquisition. Is anybody using, without naming names, but is anybody, do you think, using their analytics in that frame that they can pull out all of that historical data or present that data about their events in a very visual and transparent way to a prospective buyer that allows them to, make that sale quite easy?
Yeah, so it's absolutely unidirectional in our platform, just to be above and clear. So like if a buyer can't come to us and say, can we get the Carfax on an event, right? Only event organizer, it's ultimately their data. I just probably should say that right off the bat. So the event organizer can go in and say, hey, look, we need to stack up our historical data. We need to show the audience composition, some of the financials, and key growth trends. Like we're starting to see increased revenue per company. We're starting to see a decrease in our comp versus paid ratios and some things like that. We've helped some of our clients pre and post pandemic now, on those acquisition discussions, because it just helps from like a due diligence standpoint to get your data. To get your data in the right place. The next level of that, I think, starts to become, and I think you mentioned this earlier in your comment, for event organizers going, I want to understand if I should spin, maybe we split our event in half, maybe we spin off a bunch of regionals. There's a lot of folks that are looking at their portfolio right now, and so a couple of things that we often kind of aid with is the trend before the trend. So if you have a 10,000 person event, and it's been going on for kind of 2 or 3 years, how do you know that a subset of your market has grown from 20 people to 80 people? Now it's 250. That's not going to pop out at you at the spreadsheet level. But if you think, hey, we're going to get into 3D printing because we're seeing this kind of micro trend, some of that can help to become informative and beneficial on, what's ultimately a massively kind of complex strategic decision.
Yeah, I think those two things there, that is worth the investment in a platform like yours. Although you're obviously getting different value out of it while you're using it, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, as you've grown your business, hopefully off those trends, and you've analyzed and you've done co-locates or regionals or, sold more tickets and sponsorship space to the same customers that already trust you, maybe for just a slightly different conversation or a different topic or a slightly different demographic. Maybe you already have 20% of that demographic and you grow another event out and build that up. And then retrospectively, the value of your platform when it comes to those conversations about mergers and acquisitions and that due diligence and just the speed and ease of access to that information. I know companies and individuals spend days upon weeks collecting that information together when those conversations come up, and it's a huge investment and often takes a lot of time because all of that data and information is kind of spread out and you kind of have to pull it all together in a usable format. So I can absolutely see a platform like yours being extremely valuable in both of those scenarios, ultimately paying for itself straight out the bat when those conversations come up.
Yeah, I think we got to have you on our website.
You can use that as a quote. I'm thinking about my own selfish experience here, Joe. Time is valuable. This is something that we ultimately charge for as an industry. We charge for our time as event organizers. Yes, that might come together as an event at some point, but I often know that the industry works in an interesting way, that you have the big players that acquire and absorb the more entrepreneurial players that kind of take a risk on when AI started out, the AI Expo and conference, and that grows and they watch it grow and they acquire it and they bring that in, they pay a pretty penny for it. But with technology like yours, they could potentially identify that opportunity and save themselves the 10x, 18x, or whatever it is, multiple on that by actually launching it, but having the confidence in it that they've got based on their existing data and analysis and intellect and things like that, I think. So yeah, it's a really interesting proposition, I think, what Bear Analytics are bringing to the market. My final question for you, and this is for any of those that are watching or listening this back and they're like, where do we get started? Like, that's always the biggest question, is like, where do we get started with data? Have you got any tips or advice there when it comes to somebody who has access to it but doesn't know really where to start?
I mean, this is like the number one thing I get asked more often. It's a fair question because the answer is, I would say, non-obvious. Somewhere along the line, people assumed data can only be done, and nothing else like this in the world exists. It can only be done if you do everything all at once. It's the one thing that has to be all encompassing, and it's scary and it's massive and it's expensive, and just don't get out of bed that day. And it's like very much the only thing I can kind of equate it to, it feels a lot like the kind of late 70s, early 80s, like move to like IBM mainframes. Like, if you're going to do this before the cloud existed, right, you got to bring a whole bunch of hardware on. It's going to cost you $1 million and you don't know how to do any of it. So my advice on how to get started is, the only way you start anything that is a perceived challenge, you start small and you start regular. And so what does that mean for our clients? They come in with, you know what, I want to grow sales. Great. Let's take a look at your exhibit data. Let's take a look at where you come. Let's take a look at where you're going. Let's eliminate all of the tech hurdles to kind of get there, right? And let's keep it really straightforward. And then, just like, repeated exercise or anything else that you don't want to do and you want to do on a regular basis, 10 to 15 minutes a day, right? Let's start all of our sales meetings with, what did we learn from this week? What happened in the last 7 days? What happened in the last month, the last quarter, so on and so forth. There's a myth too that like everything we're building into the platform is because we know what to measure. That is 100% false. We know what to measure because our clients tell us the questions they have. That's it. That's the secret sauce. And so as they continue to do this, and we have some really progressive clients, and it looks like they're doing rocket science right now, but that's because they followed kind of this formula 3, 4, 5 years ago. And they're the ones that are telling us about things like the persona stuff. They're the ones that are telling us we want to find lookalike prospects. They're the ones that are telling us, hey, we need a robust post-event report because I want to make decisions 7 days after my event, not 7 months after my events happened. And so that's where the innovation comes in. And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. In fact, we recommend the opposite. Let's do one thing right before we do the second thing right.
Start small, Start often.
Yep.
Do it often. Yeah, I think that's great advice, Joe. For anybody that's watching or listening, how do they connect up with you? Where do they go for a demo of Bear Analytics? Where do they reach out to you if they want to discuss maybe their analytics being powered by Bear Analytics or partnerships and things like that?
Yeah, so they can always go to the website, www.bearanalytics.com. But I'm a personal guy. So you can always reach me at Joe, Joe, at bearanalytics.com. Yes, that's my email. That's not the dumb email. It's the only email I've ever had. And we'll get you pointed in the right direction.
And I can vouch for that. Joe is a very, very friendly and approachable person. Joe, thank you very much for coming on today. I'm sure we'll engage with you further. It seems like you're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to data analytics. And as we adopt more technology as an industry, I'm sure we're going to have more of that available to us. And you certainly seem like a person to turn to and a platform to turn to that people can use to make sense of that and use that valuable data. For everybody that's watched or listened, by the time this goes out, I think registration for Event Tech Live London 2022 should be launched. So, we do welcome you into the room. We have 5 stages of content for 2 days across the show at Excel, with lots of content just like this that we've spoken about Joe with, that'll hopefully help you deliver better, more cost-effective, and more profitable events. So do come and check us out there. It happens at Excel in London on November the 16th and 17th. You can check everything out about the event at eventtechlive.com. And if you like this episode, please give it a share, tag me and Joe in it so we know that you're there and we can engage with you on that as well. Once again, Joe, thank you very much for coming on today's podcast, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, Adam. This was awesome.